Terrorism is an anxiety-inspiring method of using unlawful force or violence by either you talk about what is the meaning of term terrorism. A more appropriate introduction, in my opinion, would be that you talk about, give name of certain organization, possibly NSCN, it could be ULFA, it could be NDFB, any of these organizations, possibly you can give one or two names, and then you may talk about some of the major terror attacks that have been carried out by them. You may talk about external support. You may talk about porous borders that Northeast has with some of our neighboring nations.
Congratulations on clearing UPSC 2024. Watching you succeed is really inspiring.
Thanks. I have been in your shoes. I know how overwhelming the start feels.
Exactly. There's so much to cover, I don't even know where to begin.
I felt the same. That's why I joined the GS Foundation course by Vision Eyes, which offers structured classes, expert faculty, and regular revision. It gave me clarity and momentum.
And you stayed consistent with it?
Yes, I followed the complete roadmap offered by the course. If you're aiming for 2026, start with this course. It offers you holistic coverage with every stage of the exam covered seamlessly. This is where your journey will truly begin.
Got it. I will definitely explore the course. Where can I find the details?
Just visit their website or call on the given numbers.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So we'll be discussing the 4 questions that have been asked in internal security in paper 3 general studies mains this year. As far as the general observation and the comment on the questions asked this year is concerned, I would say that this was perhaps one of the easiest 4 questions that we have seen in last few years from internal security. All the 4 questions were very much on the expected lines. In fact, I would not be far off from saying that all the 4 questions were based on previous year questions. So if you have attempted the previous year questions well in internal security, then writing the answers to all of these 4 questions would not have been very difficult. In fact, the good thing is that because it was based on what they had asked already, it was easy to prepare what content to write in these questions. And secondly, you could have saved some time as well, and that you could have dedicated to possibly environment and ecology or disaster management or economy section. So let's start. The first question which was asked this year, pretty much an expected question, especially because of the Pahalgam attacks. And generally, terrorism is a major internal security problem that India faces today. The question essentially asked that how terrorism has manifested itself in India. Manifestation of something means how it has shown its effects in India or how it has emerged in India. So terrorism is a disease, but the symptoms of terrorism can be seen in the way it has manifested in India in form of either left-wing extremism or cross-border terrorism or linkages with organized criminal groups, or insurgency in the Northeast, or maritime terrorism. The second part of the question wanted us to talk about what measures have been taken or have been put into place in order to deal with terrorism. So the question is pretty straightforward. The possible introduction that we can provide to a question like this could be twofold. One, so it says terrorism is a global scourge. So it's a global menace. It's a problem not just for India, but for several countries across the world. You could pick a hint from this particular statement only and start your introduction. So the possible introduction to this question could be, one, you could start by either defining terrorism. So that could be possibly the easiest way of starting the introduction to this question. How do you define terrorism? Terrorism is an anxiety-inspiring method of using unlawful force or violence by non-state groups or individuals, where they try to intimidate or threaten the people to achieve certain social or political objectives. That's the classic definition of terrorism that you can use. Right? So it's basically unlawful use of force, violence by individuals or by groups, where they try to inflict anxiety, where they try to inflict terror in minds of people with the objective of certain social or political purposes in their mind. So this is one. Or the other definition possibly could be, you could talk about some of the terror problems or terrorism related issues across the world. So you may say that today terrorism has become a cancer for the entire globe. It has spread its tentacles in different parts of the world, including India. We have seen it in form of the Pahalgam attacks recently. You could talk about Boko Haram. You may talk about Al-Shabaab. You may talk about ISIS. You may talk about Al-Qaeda. You may talk about organizations such as the FARC operating in Colombia, the terror attacks on the Twin Trade Towers in United States of America in 9/11, or you may talk about the Boston Marathon bombings or London bombings, or you may talk about the bombings in Madrid in 2004. Any of these things you may just put there for the examiner to understand. So one, either you talk about what is the meaning of term terrorism. A more appropriate introduction, in my opinion, would be that you talk about the terror problems or status of terrorism across the globe, and possibly give a few names of either terror organizations or major terror attacks that have happened across the world. Now, secondly, it says, how has it manifested itself in India? So, which are the ways in which we have seen terrorism coming into being in India? So, manifestation of terrorist attacks in India. Now, what you can do in this question is, once you have given the introduction, you may talk about how India has suffered at the hands of terrorist groups since the 1970s in various parts of the country. And then you may talk about how some of the organizations or terrorist attacks have taken place in India or manifested in India. So what are the things that we can mention? Manifestation of terrorism in India has taken place in form of cross-border terrorism. Give the names of organizations such as probably, let's say, Huji or Hizbul Mujahideen, or give the example of, let's say, Jaish-e-Mohammed, right? So you can give the names of some of these organizations which have been sponsored by external state actors to carry out terror attacks in India, and give some examples of terror attacks as well. So you may possibly talk about let's say the parliament attacks, or you may talk about Uri attacks, you may talk about Akshardham attacks, 26/11 attacks, so many of them. Secondly, terrorism in India has also manifested itself in form of left-wing extremism. So Maoism or Naxalism in parts of central India is also a manifestation of terrorism in India. Right? Then third, and again, you may throw the names of organizations here. You may throw the name of CPI Maoist, for example, here. And then you may talk about possibly one terror attack that has been carried out by CPI Maoist, the Chintanal massacre in 2010 in Dantewada, or Sukma attack in 2017. Then insurgency in Northeast. Is also one of the ways in which terrorism has manifested itself in India. Right? Again, give name of certain organization, possibly NSCN, it could be ULFA, it could be NDFB, any of these organizations, possibly you can give one or two names, and then you may talk about some of the major terror attacks that have been carried out by them. Plus, maritime terrorism. So terrorist groups have also been involved in carrying out terror attacks on ports. They have been responsible for carrying out attacks on the boats, on the vessels, shipping vessels. You can mention that. For example, the piracy that is taking place off the coast of Somalia on the Indian commercial ships is nothing but one of the manifestations of terrorism. Another important aspect of manifestation of terrorism today is cyber terrorism. The ransomware attack that took place at AIMS a few months back is a perfect example of the same. Or the Nhava Sheva port, the JNPT, Jawaharlal Nehru Port Trust, was affected by a ransomware in 2017 named as the WannaCry ransomware. Or there was an outage that took place in 2020 of the Mumbai power grid. So those can also be given as examples. And lastly, you may talk about linkages that terrorist groups have developed with organized criminal groups in India, which has helped in not only furthering the aims of terrorism, but those of the organized criminal groups as well. So these are some of the ways in which you can talk about how terrorism has manifested itself in India. You just need to explain these very briefly, because you have to remember it's just a 150 words answer, and give, most importantly, examples related to it. If possible, you can make a diagram as well, maybe a small map of India, and you can point out some of the major economic centers that have been affected due to terror attacks in India. Then, once this is done, the second part of the question is again very straightforward. The second part of the question is, what are the countermeasures that have been adopted by the state in India? And remember that this question is simply explained, so there is no need for us to analyze that whether the measures that have been taken by the state in India are enough or not. There is no need for us to do all of that. So, what are the countermeasures that have been taken in order to overcome terrorism in India? Let's talk about those countermeasures. I always say that in a subject like internal security, you should always provide your response as much as possible in a bucketed form under various subheadings. So when we talk about countermeasures, you may first talk about legal measures that have been taken in order to overcome terrorism. Legal measures would include special laws that have been made to deal with terrorism. Right? So in special laws, you may mention about laws such as the UAPA or the National Security Act. Apart from that, you can also mention that in the past, some of the specialized laws such as TADA and POTA were also enacted by the Parliament of India. You can also mention about Armed Forces Special Powers Act, of 1958, a law which has given special powers to the forces in India. Then you may also talk about amendments that have been made to some of these laws in order to deal with terrorism. For example, in 2019, a major change was made to the NIA Act, as per which NIA and UAP Act दोनों के अंदर change किया गया, and now it is possible for the government to designate individuals as terrorists. You can also mention about changes that were made to the IT Act in the year 2008. And according to which we included section 66F, which defines cyber terrorism. So these are legal measures. Then we can talk about institutional measures. Numerous institutions have been erected in India in order to deal with terrorism. In this, firstly, we can talk about, let's say we have empowered agencies such as ED, or we have created an agency known as the National Investigation Agency in 2008 that is supposed to conduct investigation, that is supposed to also conduct prosecution in terror-related cases. By the way, when you talk about legal measures, I forgot one. You can also talk about Prevention of Money Laundering Act, which is aimed at curbing terror financing in India. Because money laundering has significant linkages with terror financing. Then, institutional measures, we can talk about ED, NIA. You may talk about National Technical Research Organization that is supposed to provide technical research, technical intelligence inputs to the security agencies in India. You may also talk about initiatives such as CCTNS, or you may talk about initiatives such as NatGrid, empowerment of agencies like the Intelligence Bureau, which are supposed to again provide intelligence inputs to the security agencies about internal security threats that emanate from within India. And you can also talk about RAW, which is responsible for providing intelligence inputs with respect to India's interests abroad, and may even keep a check on the activities of terror organizations across the border or outside India that may be planning terror strikes in India. So these are some of the institutional measures. इसके अलावा और भी कुछ चीजें बोल सकते हैं. We can talk about multi-agency centers that have been set up at state level in order to provide intelligence inputs. Plus, specialized cells have been set up in state police. State police forces के अंदर specialized cells set up किए गए हैं. These specialized cells are supposed to be trained specifically in anti-terror operations. You can also mention about the NSG, the National Security Guards, which has been specifically trained to carry out counter-terror operations in India, counter-hostage situations in India. They played a very important role, as you people would know, in various terror attacks, in various hostage situations that have taken place in India, including the 26/11 attacks. Not only that, but we have also expanded the regional centers of NSG. Earlier, NSG used to have only one hub, that was in Manesar in Gurgaon. But now we have set up the regional hubs of NSG as well, so that we do not face the same kind of problem as we faced when we did during the 26/11 attacks, where the NSG commandos had to be flown all the way from Gurgaon to Mumbai, and it was already a bit too late by the time they had arrived in Mumbai. Now, what else? There are numerous diplomatic measures also that have been taken by India in order to overcome terrorism. In diplomatic measures, first we can talk about is diplomatic isolation of Pakistan. You may give the reference of the recent all-party group which went around the world exposing Pakistan's lies and how they have been responsible for promoting terror attacks in India, including the recently concluded Pahalgam attacks. Apart from that, when you talk about diplomatic measures, you can also mention how during Operation Sindoor, India has now raised the cost for terror attacks or sponsoring terror attacks on Pakistan. Another could be that India has been an active member of FATF. And we have been trying to pursue the FATF measures as a part of our law. So we have tried to make changes in our laws such as the PMLA and rules under PMLA in order to deal with the challenges of terror financing. So you can mention that. You can also mention that conference was organized few years back in Delhi. No money for terror financing. ये सारी जो चीजें हैं अगर आप केवल प्रीवियस ईयर क्वेश्चंस अटेम्प्ट करें उसी के अंदर आपको मिल जाएगा आधे से ज्यादा मटेरियल. तो a question had been asked by UPSC 2 years back that what were the objectives and the aims of the no money for terror financing conference which was organized in Delhi. So you can mention about those kind of things as well when you talk about these things. And uske alawa, fourth, we have also taken various confidence building measures in order to deal with terrorism. Confidence building measures means how we have been trying to overcome the root causes of terrorism in our society. For example, government has been carrying out various de-radicalization campaigns across the country in order to deal with terrorism. You may also mention about skill development programs for the youth. For example, Himayat program, which was initiated for the youth of Jammu and Kashmir. You can also specifically mention the initiatives that have been taken to address the problem of lack of employment and skill-based opportunities in Northeast India, or for that matter in Central India, such as the Roshni scheme, etc. So वो चीजें भी हम mention कर सकते हैं. You can also mention about the raising of village defense committees. In Jammu and Kashmir, we have tried to set up village defense committees or village defense guards where local youth has been provided training in use of small arms and to act as the eyes and the ears of the people, of the police. You can also mention various community policing initiatives that have been taken. So the list is literally endless when it comes to dealing with the problem of terrorism. Now, in this question, the way you can possibly therefore end is that terrorism is a problem that cannot be solved by one nation alone. It requires coordination, cooperation across various countries. And one of the most comprehensive ways of dealing with this would be to start with defining terrorism first. So you can end on something like that. So you can say that the initiative which was taken by India in 1996 in the form of CCIT, Comprehensive Convention on International Terrorism, to define terrorism globally accepted definition of terrorism is also something that you can end at. So is ऐसे किसी initiative पे or on why it is, because we start with the problem of how terrorism is a global scourge, is a global problem, and then you end with again how we can deal with the problem of terrorism globally, because you cannot expect to deal with the problem of terrorism through initiative of one country or one nation alone. We cannot deal with it by ourselves. Right? So these are some of the things that we can talk about as far as terrorism is concerned. There is a lot which can be written on this particular topic. Okay, there is a lot which can be written. But again, you have to remember that we have to adhere to 150 words limit. Therefore, in this question, one of the ways in which you can ensure that you write more content yet within the word limit and within the time is that apart from explaining some of these things in very brief, what you can do is you can possibly draw hub and spoke kind of diagrams where you may make, like, say, hub and spoke diagram of that, okay, these are legal measures, और फिर उसमें आप कुछ चार चीजें मेंशन कर दिया. You can mention institutional measures and then उसमें आपने again दो तीन चार चीजें मेंशन कर दिया. Can you please put your phones on silent? Then the next one is, please check your phones and please put them on silent. The next one is that you can, ऐसे इसी तरीके से ना, you can mention about the various confidence building measures that have been taken, etc. This I am suggesting because this way you don't need to necessarily write everything, and it also breaks the monotony for the examiner as well while he's checking your answer copy. Okay, so relatively very simple question. Numerous questions have been asked by UPSC related to terrorism in the past. I have just picked up a few questions which were resembling of what was asked this year. Analyze the complexity and intensity of terrorism, its causes, linkages, and obnoxious nexus that it has with various other terror groups and with the organized criminal organizations. Suggest measures that are required to be taken to eradicate the menace of terrorism. Another question was, the scourge of terrorism is a grave challenge to national security. Somehow UPSC seems to love the term scourge. What solutions do you suggest to curb this growing menace? What are the measures? What are the major sources of terrorist funding? Okay. Now, when you prepare the topic of terrorism, you need to prepare the following things. One, you need to prepare the definition of terrorism. Ideally, prepare the definition of terrorism that has been provided by either the FBI or by the second ARC. Second, you need to prepare the causes of terrorism. Third, you need to prepare types of terrorism. Okay. So this is again a classification which has been provided by the second ARC. Fourth, what are the effects of terrorism? What are the political effects? What are the economic effects? What are the social effects? What are the administrative effects? What are the diplomatic effects of terrorism? Fifth, what are the measures that have been taken by India in order to overcome terrorism? What is our security architecture to deal with the problem of terrorism? Sixth, what are the sources of funding for the terrorist organizations? What are the measures that have been taken by the government of India in order to deal with terrorist funding in India? Seventh, why global cooperation is quintessential, indispensable in order to deal with terrorism? Why terrorism cannot be solved as a problem by one nation alone? Eighth, what are the global measures that have been taken in order to deal with terrorism? And ninth, some of the provisions related to the Financial Action Task Force, what their powers are, what their functions are, what are some of the effects that they have had on solving the problem of terrorism across the globe. These are some of the dimensions that you need to prepare as far as the topic of terrorism is concerned. I hope that this is clear to all of you. Can we move further? Now, the next question, again, a very expected question. Naxalism has been one of the favorite themes of UPSC. Given the recent push of the government to eliminate terrorism and the commitment that has been made by the Union Home Minister to eliminate terrorism from India by 31st of March 2026, we were expecting a question on Naxalism, especially because Naxalism is one theme that UPSC keeps asking every second year. But in last 2 years, they had not asked a question related to Naxalism. So we were expecting a question to come up in the exam this year. The question was perhaps one of the easiest questions that they have asked on Naxalism till now. Because earlier the questions were slightly twisted here and there, but this year it was very straightforward. The question was that the government of India has made a commitment that they will eliminate Naxalism by next year. Given this, what do you understand by left-wing extremism? Secondly, how are people affected by Naxalism? Now, this is an interesting part because UPSC has never asked this portion earlier. ये नहीं पूछा है कभी UPSC ने पहले. But if you remember, some of you have attended my classes on internal security. We discuss linkages between development and spread of extremism. And we discuss how extremism affects development, how it affects the life of people, how it affects social expenditure, how it leads to loss of civilian lives, how it leads to loss of physical infrastructure, how it erodes rule of law, how it erodes social capital. All those things have to be written. If possible, with a few examples here and there. And then the third part of the question is that what are the measures that have been taken in order to eliminate Naxalism or left-wing extremism in India? So clear-cut 3 parts of the question. What is Naxalism? What are the effects of Naxalism? And what are the measures that have been taken in order to deal with Naxalism? All to be addressed in 150 words, which means that we do not have much scope for beating around the bush. What can be a possible introduction to this question? Again, 2 possible introductions can be. 1, we start with definition of left-wing extremism or Naxalism. And straight away attack the question. Or the second could be that you talk about the recent commitment that has been made by the Union Home Minister to eliminate Naxalism from India. So you may say that recently the Home Minister has stated that India would be able to eliminate Naxalism completely by 31st of March 2026. And then you come to definition of Naxalism. देखिए वो तो करना ही पड़ेगा definition. You may set a current context and then come to definition, whichever way you may want to address this. Now, let's talk about how do we define left-wing extremism or Naxalism. Left-wing extremism is a violent extremist movement that started in late 1960s in India, or is a violent extremist movement that started from Naxalbari in West Bengal in 1967. These extremists believe in use of violence in order to achieve the goals of establishing communist state in India. They want to overthrow parliamentary democracy, and they are inspired by philosophy of Mao. Revolution through the barrel of a gun. क्रांति जो है बंदूक की नोक पे जीती जाती है ना? So Mao's philosophy, use of armed rebellion, guerrilla warfare tactics in order to inflict damage upon the enemy. इतना लिखना है बस. If possible, draw a map of India and show the extent of Naxal violence in India at its peak. So you may draw a map of India, you may show the red corridor running through India, and you may show and you may write in index that Naxalism or areas under Naxal violence at its peak in 2009 or 2010. ऐसा कुछ लिख सकते हैं. There are other ways as well. You can say that Naxalism has often been called as the gravest internal security threat that India has faced for a long time. It refers to an extremist violent movement that is inspired by left-wing ideology that aims at overthrowing the democratic state in India and replacing it with a communist rule. They do not believe in idea of rule of law or parliamentary democracy. And they are inspired from the Maoist philosophy. Whichever way you may want to write, but these some basic ideas have to be written in your answer. Once that is written, then it says what have been the effects of Naxalism. So let's talk about effects of Naxalism. There is no need to write about causes. There is no need to write about reasons, etc. for Naxalism. No point of doing that. So firstly, when we talk about effects of Naxalism, again, try to divide it into various subheadings. For example, first I can talk about some of the economic effects of Naxalism. Economic effects of Naxalism would include destruction of physical infrastructure by the Naxalites. They often destroy schools, bridges, hospitals, railway tracks, gas pipelines, etc. Secondly, it affects trade and tourism. Positive sentiment in those particular areas. For example, Naxalites are involved in collecting extortion money from the traders, from the local businessmen, threatening them that they cannot carry on their business unless they provide some kind of protection money to the Naxalites. So this is another economic effect of Naxalism that you can talk about. Then we can talk about social effects of Naxalism. Social effects of Naxalism would be loss of lives. Loss of lives of not only civilians, but that of the security forces personnel as well. Numerous attacks have been carried out by the Naxalites on the security forces personnel. Huge number of loss of lives of civilians as well. Secondly, when we talk about social effects, it has led to destruction of social capital in these areas. People have lost faith in each other. It has created cleavages within the society in Naxal affected areas. So this can also be mentioned as one of the social effects of Naxalism. Then you can also mention it has diverted, or it has led to diversion of funds towards national security from social expenditure. Government could have been spending this money on social schemes, on upliftment of the people. But what has happened as a result of that? Diversion of funds has taken place towards defense expenditure. So this is also one of the social effects of Naxalism that you can talk about. Then you can talk about possibly political effects of Naxalism. Political effects of Naxalism. So in political effects of Naxalism, you can say that it has led to delays in conduct of elections. Often they have tried to sabotage elections. They have tried to threaten people to not contest the elections. There have been attacks which have taken place on leadership of the political parties. If you know about a horrendous attack that took place on the entire leadership of the Congress party in Chhattisgarh in the early 2000s, that led to the wiping of the entire cadre, senior leadership of the Congress party in the state of Chhattisgarh. So you can mention about that as well. You can, in political effects, also mention about it has eroded, or it has led to erosion of rule of law. Naxalites often use indiscriminate violence, not just against government officials, not just against bureaucrats, politicians, NGO workers, but they also use it against innocent tribals as well. Many a times they have been involved in human rights violations. You can mention about how they have used women and children as human shields against the security forces. So that is also one of the political effects that you can basically mention. Then Naxalism has also promoted organized crime in these regions. For example, drug trafficking and illegal mining. Under the patronage of Naxalites, illegal mining activities have been rampant in these parts of India, which again is a loss of economy as well. It's loss of ecology as well, because this illegal mining has destroyed the ecological balance in some of these areas. So you can mention about these things as well. Okay. So this should be enough. I mean, again, there are a lot of other things also which can be written as far as the effects of Naxalism are concerned, but this should be enough and you don't need to go beyond it. Now, once we have explained this, the next part is what measures have been taken by the government in order to deal with Naxalism. These are all very standard things, okay? There is nothing which is special about this. When we prepare the topics of internal security, we prepare all of these topics and prepare all of these ideas very well. Now, what are the measures that have been taken? So you can again begin this particular portion of the answer by that government of India's approach to dealing with Naxalism has been a multi-pronged approach. And the three pillars of that multi-pronged approach have been as follows. Firstly, there are developmental measures. Second, we have taken numerous security level measures. And third, battle against Naxalism is also a battle of perception. So what are the perception management measures that have been taken by the government? Firstly, let's talk about what are the developmental measures that have been taken by the government. Again, hundreds of them, but I'm just listing a few. The Road Requirement Plan 1, Road Requirement Plan 2, in order to improve connectivity to the Naxal affected areas of the country. Second, you can talk about skill development schemes such as Roshni initiative for providing skill development to the youth in the Naxal affected areas. Third, setting up of Eklavya residential schools for the tribal students. You may also mention about various scholarship schemes and programs that have been introduced for the tribal students in India. Then, enforcement of laws such as Forest Rights Act 2006, Panchayati Raj Extension to Scheduled Areas Act 1996, in order to provide autonomy, in order to provide power to the local people and ensure their effective participation in local governance and management of the forest resources and the community resources in such areas. You may also mention about rehabilitation and resettlement policy of the government of 2007. So all the individuals, tribal groups, indigenous people, those who have been displaced as a result of various developmental projects, they have been resettled and rehabilitated under some of these programs which have been made under this policy. Aspirational Districts Program of Niti Aayog that aims at bringing rapid economic and social development to some of the most backward districts of the country, which have been labeled as aspirational districts. Programs such as MG Narega could also be mentioned as an initiative taken for addressing the problem of Naxalism, even though that is not the main aim of MG Narega, but it has helped in addressing the problem of MG Narega. Then we can mention about various security related measures. Security related measures, modernization of police forces scheme, where central government provides assistance to the state governments to modernize their police forces. Under this modernization of police forces scheme, there is a program named as Security Related Expenditure Scheme, where the central government reimburses the expenditure that is made by the state governments towards fighting Naxalism. Third, setting up of forward operating bases in Naxal affected areas. Earlier, when the CRPF used to clear a particular area of Naxal presence, they would have to retreat back to their base, which meant that they were leaving that particular area vulnerable for the Naxalites to take it back. Ab unhone kya kiya hai? They have set up their full-fledged forward operational bases in Naxal affected areas so that they don't need to retreat. Then, various helicopter services have been introduced in these areas in order to improve the logistical supply for the security forces. Setting up of special anti-Naxal units, elite units have been set up of state police forces as well as of CRPF in order to deal with the Naxalites. They have been trained in guerrilla warfare. For example, you can mention about the Cobra Battalion of CRPF. You can mention about the famous Greyhounds of Andhra Pradesh or the Black Panthers of Chhattisgarh. You can also mention about a doctrine that was released by the government in 2017-18 named as the Samadhan Doctrine, which is aimed at ensuring a uniform approach for all the players in order to deal with Naxalism effectively. You can also talk about setting up of joint operation centers so that we can improve the coordination between the state police forces and the center and the state police forces in order to deal with Naxalism. This was one of the areas in which we were lacking significantly earlier. Again, this list is endless. I can go on and talk about many other things, but this should be enough. Even if you write 5 points each, more than enough. There is no need to write 7, 10 and all of that. Okay. In fact, the way the question is, considering that you'll end up spending almost 30 words on explaining Naxalism and left-wing extremism, you have barely 120 words left, in which, let's say, even if you write a 10 to 15 word conclusion, you have maybe just around 100 words left. 50 words, you will explain the effects of terrorism, of Naxalism, and then you just have 50 words left in order to explain what are the measures that have been taken in order to address Naxalism. So therefore, आपके पास ज़्यादा opportunity है नहीं, आप 3-4 points से ज़्यादा लिख नहीं सकते एक head के अंदर. Then the last is, what are the perception management measures that have been taken by the government? So there is something called as civic action program, civic action plan actually. So this civic action plan or program is aimed at encouraging participation of the CRPF and security forces in various developmental activities in Naxal affected areas so as to win the confidence of the local population. So they organize health camps, they organize legal camps, they organize certain educational initiatives so that they can win over the confidence of the local people. Secondly, you can also mention about the media plan. So this is also something which is a part of the modernization of police forces scheme, in which the government is involved in creating jingles, various awareness camps, including conducting nukkad nataks, making certain awareness films, so that the youth and the people in the Naxal affected areas can be told about the positive measures that have been taken by the government in order to deal with this problem, and how the government is actually concerned about the well-being of the people in such areas. ऐसा कुछ कर सकते हैं. Then conclusion. Conclusion to this answer again can be in two ways. Either you give something futuristic, that we need to do this more or this and that and everything, or you can simply talk about that we have made rapid strides in dealing with Naxalism in the last 15 years. From 1/3 of the districts of India affected by Naxalism in 2009, we have brought down the number to less than 30 in the present day. And soon, we would be writing the obituary of Naxalism from India. Right? So you could write something like that as a conclusion to this particular question. Is it clear? Pretty straightforward and easy. There are questions that have been asked in the past, in my opinion, which were significantly more complicated on Naxalism as compared to what they have asked this year. For example, these are 3 questions, but again, these are not the only questions that have been asked by UPSC related to Naxalism in the past. Naxalism is a social, economic and developmental issue manifesting as a violent internal security threat. In this context, discuss the emerging issues and the multi-layered, thoda kuch gadbad ho gaya, and the multi-layered strategy to tackle the problem of Naxalism. What are determinants of left-wing extremism in eastern parts of India? What are the reasons? What are the factors that have led to rise of Naxalism in eastern parts of India? What strategy should government of India, civil administration and the security forces adopt in order to counter this threat? So this is more like what measures need to be taken apart from what have already been taken. And third, left-wing extremism is showing a downward trend but still affects many parts of the country. Briefly explain the government of India's approach to counter the challenges posed by LWE. So the second part of the question that was asked this year was very similar to the question which had been asked in 2018. That's why I began the discussion by saying that if you have simply looked at the previous year questions and solved them for internal security, that should be more than enough to write the answers to the questions that were asked this year. Of course, you needed some kind of current affairs inputs that you could have included in your answers to give it a fresh perspective. Now, let's move on to the next question. Question number 19. Insurgency in Northeast has finally, and challenges of security in Northeast India have finally made their way back into the question paper. UPSC has not asked a lot of questions on insurgency in the Northeast or security challenges in Northeast India in the past. And in fact, for a few years, they had not asked one question on this issue. Ab वापस से finally, I think almost after 6 years, they've ended up asking a question on the security challenges in Northeast India. Now, the question is, what are the major challenges to internal security and peace process in northeastern states? This brings us to the point that insurgency in Northeast India started right at the stroke of independence itself, starting from Naga insurgency. This has been the longest unsolved problem, internal security problem that India has been facing since independence. No other problem is so old as insurgency in Northeast India. So you can start your answer from that only. That Northeast India has been infested with insurgency for more than 7 decades, including the states of Manipur, Nagaland, Assam, Meghalaya, Mizoram, Tripura in the past. Some of these states we have been able to overcome insurgency, by the way. But then you will mention that this is not the only internal security challenge that exists in Northeast India. So you can bring that contrast in your answer and then talk about various internal security challenges that exist in Northeast India. Or what are the challenges to the peace process or establishing peace in Northeast India. So that could be a possible introduction. Anyway, then the second part of the question is, map various peace accords and agreements initiated by the government in the past decade. So you have to talk about, see, when it says map various peace accords, you not only have to talk about peace accords very briefly, but you have to talk about what kind of problem that they aim to resolve, what security challenge that they aim to resolve. For example, Naga Peace Framework was signed by the Government of India with some of the Naga groups in 2015, which aimed at ending the insurgency in Nagaland by groups such as the NSCN. The Bodo Peace Agreement, third Bodo Peace Agreement in 2020 was aimed at ending the Bodo insurgency that is almost 3 decades long or 3 decades old in India. Or the Bru-Riang Agreement that was aimed at resettling of the Brus in Mizoram. Right? So those are some of the examples that you have to give of peace agreements that have been signed by the Government of India in the last decade. Now see, very interestingly, the question is not about peace agreements in general, because in that case we could have talked about Mizo Peace Accord, and we could have talked about the Shillong Peace Accord, we could have talked about the peace accord with the Assamese groups, the Assam Peace Accord, etc., or the accord that was signed with the Tripura insurgent groups as well. This one is specifically about the initiatives or the measures that have been taken in the last 10 years to address the problem of insurgency in the Northeast. Now let's begin. Firstly, therefore, in this question, we need to write, as I said, the status of insurgency in Northeast. You can begin with that. And how insurgency in Northeast is as old as the country itself, as old as Indian nation itself. Or you could talk about some insurgent movements in Northeast and how they have created a havoc for Northeast India. And then you relate it to talking about that apart from insurgency, what are the other challenges? Or you can simply say, what are the challenges to security and peace process in Northeast India? आप इस तरीके से भी स्टार्ट कर सकते हैं that Indian government has been trying to overcome insurgency in the northeast since the 1950s, but it remains an unsolved problem till date. Some of the challenges that exist to establish peace and to ensure security in northeast India are as follows. So what are those challenges? One is there are physical challenges. What are those physical challenges? Connectivity of northeast India to rest of the country has been extremely poor for the longest time, because of which we have not been able to bring economic development to the region at such a rapid pace, and movement of the security forces and logistical supply to these areas have been difficult. Second, so one is issues of connectivity. What you can do is that on the map of India, or maybe you can just draw a magnified map of northeast India, and in that you can show some of the insurgent groups that have been operational in northeast in the past. Just one each should be enough. In Tripura, all Tripura Tiger Force or the NLFT. In Assam, Ulfa or NDFB or DHD. Or in Meghalaya, you can talk about the HNLC, the Hynetrep National Liberation Council, or the Garo National Liberation Army. Or in Manipur, you can talk about the Cookies, Cookie rebellion groups, or you can talk about the NSCN. Nagaland, you can talk about NSCN. So you can draw that kind of a map. Another thing which you can do is that you can show in that same map itself how the connectivity of northeast India to the rest of the country has been very poor for the very longest time. Second, the geography of northeast itself is very difficult. It's rugged terrain and topography, which makes it suitable for guerrilla warfare and makes it extremely difficult to develop infrastructure in those areas. Landslide prone, flood prone geography, topography. Plus on top of that, dense forests, hills, rugged topography. Because of that, it is easy for the guerrillas to hide and to conduct attacks on the security forces and the officials. Then you can also mention psychological isolation of northeast. Not only has northeast India been physically isolated from the rest of the country, but psychological isolation of northeast India from rest of the country. It rarely features in the agenda of the mainstream media in India, the problems of people of northeast. That makes them feel alienated. That makes them feel that they have not been given much importance by the government. Secondly, you can also talk about racial discrimination that has been carried out against the citizens of India from northeast, which has also created this psychological rift between the mainland and northeast India. Third, you may talk about external support. You may talk about porous borders that northeast has with some of our neighboring nations, which has created difficulties in addressing the problem of northeast, of insurgency in northeast. Why? Because porous borders mean that there is free supply of arms from across the borders. Not just that, but drug trafficking is rampant across the borders, which encourages linkages with insurgent groups, and they often end up sponsoring insurgent activities in northeastern region. So this is also a big challenge in addressing the problem of northeast insurgency.
In UPSC CSE, current affairs isn't just important, it's the heartbeat of your preparation. But with news pouring in from every direction, multiple sources, and endless formats, it's easy to feel lost. The real challenge? Knowing what to study and what to skip. That's exactly why Vision IS brings you the monthly Current Affairs Revision Program 2026, starting 23rd August, 2 p.m. Across 60 comprehensive classes, available both offline and online, we decode the most relevant national and international news for you, drawing from trusted sources like The Hindu, Indian Express, Economic Times, PIB, Yojana, and more. With expert guidance, personalized mentoring, and rigorous MCQ plus mains-oriented assessments, you'll build a rock-solid grasp over current affairs, streamlining your preparation for prelims, mains, and the interview stage. A strong hold over current affairs isn't optional, it's your way to succeed in UPSC CSE.
You can also mention how India's neighborhood in Northeast is destabilized, especially, let's say, Myanmar. What tends to happen is that Myanmar is dealing with its own problems. If an insurgent group from India, which is operating in Nagaland, crosses the border, runs into Myanmar, Myanmar security agencies are least bothered about taking care of them. This happens with respect to various insurgent groups in Myanmar as well. Various insurgent groups in Myanmar often cross the border, come into India. Indian security forces don't bother about them. Why should we? So there is lack of cooperation, diplomatic cooperation between India and its neighboring nations, which has also been one of the major roadblocks in addressing the problem of insurgency in Northeast India. Then, of course, you talk about lack of economic opportunities. Economic development in Northeast India has been one of the major causes for grievances, disgruntlement, anger of the Northeast citizens, and as a result of that, many of them have ended up joining hands with the insurgent groups. Lack of employment opportunity, lack of constructive engagement of the youth has also created that kind of a situation. Then another major challenge in addressing the problem of insurgency in Northeast is various ethnic conflicts that exist within the communities in Northeast India. You may give the example here, especially of Manipur. Multiple insurgent groups belonging to different ethnicities have been fighting against each other for establishing control over limited resources in Northeast India. This has created a lot of difficulty for the government and the security forces in dealing with this problem. Then you may also talk about excessive corruption in government machinery. Has meant that funds which were meant for development of the people of Northeast India have ended up in the hands of the insurgents and in the hands of criminals. So the beneficiaries have not really been helped as a result of the crores of money that has been spent by the government of India on addressing the problem of Northeast India. Plus, another major challenge is because we have porous borders with our countries, influx of illegal immigrants has created tensions in the society. And has made the process of establishing peace in Northeast India very difficult. Because there is a lot of tension, social tensions have come up between the outsiders and the indigenous people of Northeast India. Those who believe that their land, their jobs, their political power is under a threat due to the influx of the illegal immigrants from outside India. Is this clear? And then it says, map the various peace accords and agreements that have been initiated by the government in the past decade. So what are some of the peace agreements that we can talk about? One, so again, peace agreements signed in one last decade. ऐसे करके एक heading दे दिया. You can talk about the Naga Peace Framework that was signed with some of the Naga groups, including NSCN-K and NSCN Isaac Muiwa faction, NSCN Isaac Muiwa faction especially, right, which was aimed at ensuring peace and settlement of the outstanding issues with the Naga groups to settle their demand for a separate Naga nation. So, थोड़ा सा explain कर दीजिएगा इसको हल्का सा. Second, you can mention about, so this was 2015. Then you can talk about third Bodo Peace Framework or third Bodo Peace Framework or third Bodo Peace Agreement, which was aimed at ending the Bodo insurgency where the Bodo groups such as NDFB were involved in asking for a separate state of Bodo land to be carved out of the state of Assam. How have we settled this issue? Bodo districts have been given separate status as Schedule 6 areas. We have established an autonomous council for the Bodo districts. We have given a special development package for the Bodo districts as well. And plus on top of that, we have also provided them resettlement and rehabilitation measures. If they are ready to surrender, then the government has promised their rehabilitation and resettlement into the mainstream society. So you can mention about that as well. Then you can mention about the Bru-Riang Peace Agreement, Bru Agreement. So the Bru-Riang Peace Agreement was also signed in 2020, which was aimed at permanent settlement of Bru families in Tripura and in certain parts of Mizoram as well. Okay, so you can mention about the Bru-Riang Agreement as well as one of the initiatives that has been taken by the government. Then there was a movement that was going on in Assam for a very long time, in Karbi Anglong region, by the Karbi groups, where they were asking for a separate state for themselves to be carved out of the state of Assam. So this Karbi agreement was also signed in 2021. Okay, so again, aimed at settling this entire Karbi agreement issue. Plus, on top of that, you can also mention about the peace agreement that was signed with UNLF, United National Liberation Front in Manipur. This was signed in 2023. Now, towards the end of this particular answer, you can mention that there are numerous other measures also that have been taken by the government, including developmental measures and gradual repeal of APSPA from the northeastern states. But the recent events in Manipur are a cause of worry because there is a possibility of resurgence of insurgency in the region and possibly a threat to all the efforts that have been made by the Indian state over the last 30 years or so in order to address insurgency in northeast. ठीक है, तो इस तरीके से कुछ आप conclude कर सकते हैं. और you can always mention in conclusion that as we can see from our past experiences, resolution of problem of insurgency in northeast or security challenges can only be made through diplomatic efforts coupled along with various security initiatives. तो उस तरीके से भी हम इसको end कर सकते हैं. Anyway, so this is 19th question, and now let's look at the last question, and that is again a very expected question. से ये question आया था 17 में, है ना. उसके बाद I think बार बार उन्होंने questions पूछे कुछ नॉर्थ ईस्ट से related, but they were more or less related to cross border or the issues related to the border management etc. से mix करके पूछा था. This year somehow interestingly the questions are from very very expected topics. Otherwise in last few years we have seen that cyber security से एक question हमेशा आता था. This year no question on cyber security somehow. Okay, possibly they felt that they have overdone that particular topic, so they didn't ask anything. We were possibly expecting a question on role of media this year, especially given the irresponsible behavior of the Indian media during Operation Sindoor, but they didn't ask a question on that. Or possibly a question on social media and how social media is being used and leveraged by the anti-social elements and the Naxalites and the insurgent groups and the terrorist groups in India. उसके ऊपर भी question नहीं पूछा इन्होंने. So these are some of the questions that you can expect now next year. So next year I would say that the topic of media, social media, the topic of cyber security are going to make a comeback, right? Money laundering, organized crime पे question नहीं पूछा. So maybe next year organized crime and money laundering can become important topics. So that's how you have to analyze. It doesn't mean that जरूरी नहीं है कि next year Naxalism पे question नहीं पूछेगा. Given the fact that Indian government is claiming that we'll be able to end Naxalism by next year and some important developments take place, there is a possibility that they may ask a question on Naxalism next year as well. It's not that they don't repeat questions year after year. Back-to-back years में भी कई बार themes are repeated. But the expected themes next year will be therefore this. Because देखिए internal security, the good part is that topics are limited. वो ज़्यादा बाहर जा नहीं सकता एक point के बाद. So therefore, some of these topics will become important next year. Security agencies and their mandate will become important next year. For example, maybe on CAPF or on intelligence architecture of India or on the state police forces, etc. and so on and so forth. Anyway, so the question was, Northeast region of India has been infested with insurgency for a very long time. Analyze the major reasons for the survival of armed insurgency in the region. Actually, this is a very similar kind of a question to what has been asked this year. Because इस बार का question भी क्या है कि क्या challenges हैं in addressing the security issues in Northeast and establishing peace in Northeast. Now, the question is not about causes for insurgency. Please remember, neither this question is that, nor that question is that. It is about why, despite so many years, insurgency continues to persist in Northeast India. Now, let's move on. The last question. Why is maritime security vital to protect India's sea trade? Discuss maritime and coastal security challenges and the way forward. So, again, 3 parts of the question. First, importance of maritime security for economic purposes, for trade. Second, what are the various maritime security challenges that India faces? And third, what suggestions can we give in order to address these particular challenges? So let's look at what things we have to write in this. Again, the answer to this question could begin by talking about the status of India's coastline. Or the answer to this question could begin by talking about, let's say, 26/11 attacks were a wake-up call for the Indian security forces to beef up their security in maritime area. Or the answer to this question could simply be that you start with maritime security plays a very important role in projecting the power and the global trade of any country in present day era. Now, so today, if you look at it, the blue economy, the maritime strategy of nations has become very, very important. The next era of fights or battles that are going to take place between various countries is going to be on sea. Why? Let's talk about it. So, firstly, let's talk about importance of maritime security for trade or for economy. First and foremost, it is important for energy security. India is an energy starved nation. If we have to grow economically, we need oil. And most of our energy requirements, almost 85% of our energy requirements are met through sea route. Secondly, most of our trade, global trade with the rest of the world, almost 70% of our global trade with the rest of the world takes place through sea route. Third, maritime security is important because in the past there have been attacks on Indian commercial vessels by, let's say, pirates, which has raised the cost of insurance and which has made Indian trade more expensive, or which has reduced the advantage of Indian manufacturing. So, therefore, raised cost of insurance. अगर किसी पर्टिकुलर एरिया में पायरेट्स का थ्रेट रहेगा तो जो इंश्योरेंस कंपनीज हैं मैरीटाइम या शिपिंग कंपनीज से ज़्यादा इंश्योरेंस प्रीमियम मांगती हैं, एंड दैट कॉस्ट इज पास्ड ऑन टू द मैन्युफैक्चरर, एंड दैट अल्टीमेटली अफेक्ट्स इंडियाज ग्लोबल ट्रेड, or it affects our competence or competitiveness in global trade. So you can mention that also. Fourth, you can mention that today sea or the mineral resources in deep sea can be a very important source of fueling 21st century economies. Various rare earth elements, rare earth minerals have been discovered in deep sea, and because of that also it becomes very important. Then lastly, you can also mention about large fishing community in India. Large number of fishermen living in the coastal areas of India from Gujarat to Bengal. They're dependent on maritime security. for their survival. So these are some of the things that you can essentially mention about. देखिए इसमें और भी चीजें mention किया जा सकती है, पर उसने trade की बात की है, economic की बात करी है. So these are some of the things that you can mention. Large fishing community, and then they are dependent on export of these fish and the marine products to outside India, which is a significant source of foreign exchange for us, which is a significant source of money for us. Anyway, now, what are some of the maritime security challenges that India faces? Now, in the maritime security challenges, first is piracy, especially of the coast of East Africa. Various pirate attacks have been carried out by different groups against the Indian ships and the commercial vessels in the past. Then, secondly, you can also talk about terrorism and infiltration. Give the example of, yes, 26/11 attacks. Third, smuggling, organized crime, drug trafficking via the sea route is also a major problem, especially because India's coastal borders are so huge. They are unguarded at many points. There are a lot of vulnerabilities that we have on our coastal borders, because of which they make them a hotspot for the influx of drugs and influx of various kind of other smuggled products into India. Then, fourth is China's increasing presence in the Indian Ocean region. China's aggressive posturing in the Indian Ocean region. Strings of pearls. They have established military ports, military bases in Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Maldives. This is a major challenge to us today. Why? Because it affects our projection as a global power. If we cannot control the sea that belongs, or that is, doesn't belong to us, but it belongs next to our neighborhood, if we can't project ourselves as a regional power in the Indian Ocean region, how can we expect to fulfill the role as a global power in future? So this is also another major challenge that is posed on the maritime front for us. Then you can also mention about illegal fishing. Illegal fishing, illegal mining in the maritime areas is also another major challenge that we have on this front. Then apart from that, when we talk about challenges of maritime and coastal security, you can also talk about boundary disputes. For example, the Sir Creek dispute that we have with Pakistan, or the dispute that we have with Sri Lanka often, the fight or the skirmishes that keep taking place between the Indian and the Sri Lankan fishermen. तो वो सब चीजें भी हम mention कर सकते हैं, but just a mention of these 5 should be enough. Again, if you can draw a map of the coastal India and you can show कुछ भी उसमें एक आधा कोई भी चीज दिखा दीजिए. Maybe you show just strings of pearls, the major ports on which China is establishing its presence. इतना भी दिखा दिया, so it just adds a bit of value and flavor to your answer, nothing else. Okay. Anyway, now what is the way forward? So way forward means that we should know what are the problems that exist as far as India's coastal security is concerned. See, one is that we need to improve coordination between the various security forces that are deployed for coastal security. State Marine Police Force, Coastal Guard, Coast Guard, and the Indian Navy. Secondly, upgradation of capacity for the State Marine Police Force, because they are supposed to be guarding India's territorial waters. Third, involvement of local communities or fishermen to act as the eyes and the ears of the security forces, to tell them about any kind of untoward activities that are taking place in India's coastal regions. Fourth, stringent legal measures in order to deal with issues such as piracy. तो इसमें आप एग्जाम्पल भी दे सकते हैं दैट वी हैव ऑलरेडी टेकन मेजर्स फॉर द एंटी पायरेसी मैरीटाइम एक्ट रिसेंटली. वी नीड टू एनफोर्स इट इफेक्टिवली. Then surveillance through technology, especially in some of the areas where, given the long coastline that we have, surveillance through technology by deployment of satellite cameras, by deployment of radars, by deployment of the infrared vision cameras is also something which is important for maintaining India's coastal security. Then you can also mention about diplomatic initiatives by conducting regular exercises to develop interoperability and to develop the capability of our coastal security forces. So you may mention the example of Milan exercise or the Simmix exercise, etc. And all of those things can also be given as a measure. So then last इसमें जब conclusion लिखना हो, so you can again wrap up by talking of just इसको तो summarize कर दीजिएगा है ना, simply where you can say that not only will maritime security help us in protecting our trade but also help in projecting India's rise as a global power, or not only will maritime security efforts help us in protecting our economic interest but also help in becoming the overall net security provider in the Indian Ocean region, right? So you may have heard of all of these terms in your international relations. Okay. हाँ सर, जो भी सागर प्रहारी बल, सागर मिशन, बहुत कुछ है सर. There are so many things. No problem. ठीक है. Okay. Yes. Anyone has any questions? So relatively very simple questions which were asked from the topic of internal security this year. Just to wrap up a few things before I conclude and then we move on to the next paper, which is paper 4, is that in internal security, I have been repeating this for a very long time. The good part is that questions are very much predictable. This is one of the easiest topics to cater to in your examination. But इसके लिए आपके अपने खुद के बने हुए नोट्स होने चाहिए. आपके पास हर टॉपिक की जो स्पेसिफिक डायमेंशन है वो प्रिपेयर्ड होनी चाहिए. जैसे कि नक्सलिज्म हो गया, कि what is Naxalism, what are the effects of Naxalism, what are the measures taken to overcome Naxalism, what are the causes of Naxalism, what have been the challenges with respect to our approach in dealing with shortcomings in our approach, what is the way forward. Similarly, with respect to the topic of organized crime, you should know what is organized crime, what are the linkages of organized crime with terrorist groups, what are the different kind of linkages, how do they support each other, why there has been a rise in linkages between organized criminal groups and the terrorist groups in the recent past, what measures have been taken in India to order to address this problem, what more needs to be done, what are the challenges in addressing organized crime in India. Similarly, the topic of, let's say, role of media, how media can play a positive role in enhancing India's internal security efforts. What are the challenges that media poses to India's internal security? Similarly, for social media, then security agencies, you need to have maybe 30 to 50 words for each of the security agencies in terms of their functions and responsibilities, and then issues associated with functioning of CAPF, issues associated with functioning of the state police forces. What are the reforms which are required in their functioning? ये सब चीजें हमें prepare करना जरूरी है. Is this clear to everyone? Yes. So we are done with the internal security topic.